Welcome to The Explainer. Have you ever noticed how a massive global crisis can be happening, but the top story on your local news is a traffic jam? Well, today we're going to unpack exactly how that happens, connecting the dots from a major international conflict all the way down to the headlines in one local community. So, to really get a sense of the scale here, let's start with just one number: 3,000. That's how many targets the U.S. reportedly hit inside Iran in just the first week of a new military operation. It's a staggering figure, and it's the spark that ignites everything else we're about to discuss. And here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start with the conflict itself, then see how America's key allies are reacting or not reacting. From there, we'll zoom way in on a local election in Australia before zooming back out to see what the media is actually covering. And finally, we'll wrap it all up with a big question about priorities. All right, let's dive right into the event that sets this whole chain reaction in motion. We're talking about a major military operation with immediate global consequences. The operation itself is called Epic Fury. According to the source material, it's a joint military action by the US and Israel against Iran, and it's presented as a really significant escalation in the region. And just 1 week in, the picture is already incredibly messy. On one hand, you have these reports of major infrastructure damage in Iran. You have the tragic human cost with U.S. service members being brought home. But on the other hand, you have these completely conflicting narratives. The U.S. is claiming a huge success, an 85% drop in attacks, while Iran is projecting total strength, saying, hey, we can keep this up for 6 months. Of course, an event like this doesn't just happen in a bubble. And the international response, especially from America's closest allies, is being shaped by the long, complicated shadow of past wars. And this is fascinating, right? You can see the diplomatic whiplash over the last couple of decades. Back in 2003, for the Iraq War, the UK and Australia were right there from the start. But now, there's a lot of hesitation, a lot of caution, and it's all being tied directly back to the political fallout from that earlier conflict. And that tension, it spills right out into the open. The source highlights this social media post from the US president, who sounds pretty frustrated with the UK's foot dragging. It reads like a mix of, we don't need you anyway, and, well, a pretty clear warning. Meanwhile, down in Australia, a top diplomat is drawing a very, very clear line in the sand. She just comes right out and says it. This is not Iraq, and we are not the Howard government. It's an explicit signal that the political math of today is totally different from what it was in 2003. Okay, so from that massive international stage, our story now takes a sharp turn and zooms way, way in to a single high-stakes political race happening in regional Australia. So what we're looking at here is a special election. They call it a by-election for a district named Farrer. Now, this is a seat that's been held by the same Conservative Party for a quarter of a century. So when it suddenly comes up for grabs, it becomes this huge test of the country's political mood. And this is where it gets really interesting. For what should be a super safe conservative district, the betting markets are telling a completely different story. An independent candidate is the clear frontrunner. The incumbent party, meanwhile, is way back in fourth place. Let's break down the key players. You've got Tiffany Teal, the independent who's leading the pack. You've got candidates from a couple of other conservative parties. But then, look at that last row. The Liberal Party, the one whose seat this has been for 25 years, at this point, they hadn't even named a candidate. That's pretty wild. So now let's pull the lens back out again. We've got a war, we've got tense international diplomacy, we have a fascinating local election. With all of that going on, what actually makes the evening news? The source highlights this one perfect anecdote. It's a Friday night in Melbourne, less than a week into this major war. You turn on the news, and what's the lead story? Not the conflict. It was Formula One, specifically how a local driver was doing in the Grand Prix. And the war? The one with hundreds of casualties? Oh, it got a mention. Eventually. It was the fifth story in the broadcast. In fact, and you really can't make this stuff up, a burst water main that was causing traffic jams in a nearby suburb was actually given more airtime, more prominence, than the international conflict. So what does this all mean? How do you connect a war in the Middle East, the ghost of Iraq, a local election, and a news report about a traffic jam? How do they all fit together? Well, you can think of it as a kind of funnel effect. You start with this massive, world-changing event, but as it travels down the funnel, it gets filtered. It's filtered through the political baggage of the past, it has to compete with ongoing high-stakes local politics, and by the time it reaches the public through the news, it can end up being smaller and less important than a burst pipe. This is about more than just a news lineup. It's about how our collective attention gets focused, and that focus ultimately shapes everything from public opinion to political pressure. And all of this leaves us with one final, kind of thorny question to think about. In a world where we're flooded with information, from global battlefields to our own backyards, who or what is actually deciding what's important? It's definitely something to chew on the next time you turn on the news.